Several of the endorsements for this book have noted that we chart a course between what we might call rationalism and irrationalism. So what's the tension that we're working through here? Now, on the one hand, for folks who might not have a background necessarily in theology, it's something like this. On the one hand, God says to us, you can know me. You're my image bearer. I'm going to explain to you who I am. And that knowledge is present in the scripture, for example. Nouns, verbs, concepts, histories. God's communicating to us who God is. But in the very communication, what's communicated by God is that I am incomprehensible. Now, the tension then that we're trying to navigate is, on the one hand, you'll have folks who almost at times think it sounds like they've figured God out. They've sat down with their Bible in a study and have, in a manner of speaking, written about God, and now God's in their back pocket. Their mind has encompassed God to the fullest extent possible. And we think that's the wrong move. You can't do that with God. God's not like that. However, what God has communicated to us is concrete in some ways, and we take what God has given. And what God has given, principally, we're arguing in this book, is that I am incomprehensible, yet coming to you at the same time. So there's a hyper-rationalism that we're rejecting, this idea I can understand God fully and completely, like I have a sheet of paper written down what God's like, it's in my back pocket. On the other hand, there can be, when people talk about mystery, people who understand this other side of God, which is there's a lot about God and how God's working in the world and the nature of prayer and the wonder of the incarnation and the beauty of the Trinity. There's so much about God where we just end up with mystery, as some folks would say, which is right to a given extent. The danger can be what we might call kind of a loosey-goosey understanding of mystery where it's too exaggerated on the irrational side of things. And what we're arguing is something like this, in a nutshell, that God has revealed himself to be a wondrous beauty in something like the incarnation, or the Trinity itself, the mystery and wonder of the Trinity. And we can think about the Trinity, talk about the Trinity. God's coming to us. God's intensely personal. There's this personal wonder and beauty and glory in the Trinity. God's like us in some ways at that point because we're God's personal image bearers. So that one might be the more rational side of things. But there's also an aspect to the Trinity that doesn't fit any of our categories. In fact, God's come and said to us, I'm unlike you. I'm the creator of everything. I'm not trapped in time. I'm not trapped in space. I'm creator. You're created. You're my image bearers, but only to a given extent. And so that would be it's like we're working on a project, if you can think of it this way, where even in the history of theology itself, particularly from maybe the 18th century on the one hand, you think of a ship, and the ship begins to list to one side because the emphasis on the rational comprehension of God is too accentuated, and we begin to we begin to forget that there's this other side of God that goes beyond all our categories. Our categories lead up to a certain point and then they stop. And so the ship will begin to write and then list in a different direction. So in terms of what we might call a hyper-irrationalism, where all is mystery, nothing can be said. So what we're arguing is that in these, at the heart and core of Christians' relationship with God, are now kind of riding the ship, are beauties that the church has passed on, wonders that the church has passed on, and its understanding of God as revealed mystery to us, and they're encapsulated and things such as the Trinity, the Incarnation, the nature of prayer, worship itself. And so what we're trying to do is speak at those places where we're called to speak and indeed called to bear testimony, and at the same time to be silent and hit our knees at those points, which are often where the wonder overwhelms us, because it's an incomprehensible wonder and glory. But that very worship at that point then leads us back into speaking of it in human words and concepts. And in the scripture, concepts and human words inspired by God himself. Something like that.